So
Wow.
I came up when the world was changing, and it was very fortuitous. I was standing here when the world was first coming to grips with women wanting real jobs and having the opportunity.
Matt Woolley Podcast.
All right, so today we are with Lorraine Heartfield, and Lorraine is a dear friend of mine, and Lorraine has a just wide variety of expertise that I just felt like we needed to share. So thank you for being on here, Lorraine.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so who is Lorraine Heartfield? Okay, so she is a wife, current widower. She is a graduate of Lamar University from Beaumont, Texas, with biology and chemistry. She is a University of Texas graduate for anthropology, archeology with a master's, and then she has a PhD from Washington State University. Lorraine has been an environmental consultant. She has been the partner of Heartfield, Price, and Green, Inc., and is currently a regulatory consultant for cultural resources and environmental issues. And also she deals with multi-state projects in doing all of that. So, Lorraine, I totally 120% feel I'm already dumber than you just starting off with all of your credentials in place.
Well, I'm afraid I'm the typical academic, normal things like getting through a day with car keys and all of that. Figuring out where I'm going and why I'm there sometimes is a challenge. So,
well, I've had, our viewers don't know, but I've had many opportunities to speak with you, and every time I find so many just fascinating stories. And I just appreciate you being on here, and I hope that we can, mine and your conversations always go all over the board, but I enjoy them thoroughly. And I'm hoping I can get some of those wisdom nuggets out of you that I've gotten before. So let's start off. Who is, Lorraine? We got your background, but where is Lorraine from? Where did you grow up, Lorraine?
Beaumont, Texas.
Beaumont, Texas.
Middle class, white girl family. Came from a family where many of the people owned small businesses or worked for small businesses. So I didn't come out of any kind of a corporate background, which probably is why I ended up where I did. Also, I grew up at a time when women really didn't have a lot of opportunities. My chemistry teacher in high school had a PhD. We lived in a refinery area, and yet the only job she could get was to teach high school. So wow. I came up when the world was changing, and it was very fortuitous. I was standing here when the world was first coming to grips with women wanting real jobs and having the opportunity, but also the environmental movement kicked off as I was in graduate school. So it was forming. People were trying to figure out what it meant, what we needed to do, how do we respond, and I just happened to be there. So it was a very lucky break, career-wise.
Well, were you a city girl, a country girl? What were you?
Well, a little of both. I grew up in a city, but my parents were outdoors people, and my granddad lived in a fish camp on the Galveston Bay.
Oh, awesome.
So we fished and hunted, crabbed, collected oysters, wandered all over the big thicket. I was outdoors my whole life.
So what was the early life? What did that look like for Lorraine? I mean, what's...
It was fun.
So what was Lorraine's life from, 6 to 18?
Well, it's funny because I always loved archeology, and my family gave me books. And we collected arrowheads on the beach down on the Galveston Bay and pottery, and I was a ballet dancer. I mean, it was just a world of contrast.
Wow.
And I loved it, and it just never dawned on me that I had to be just one thing. And I did love the outdoors. Being a ballet dancer, I was in pretty good shape. I loved to hike, camp, and So, and my family encouraged my academic interest. And I was terrible in math. So,
Me too.
you know, I kind of slid into, but I met some archaeologists when I was a child, and they were encouraging. And so that was part of it. And so as I grew up, I don't remember not wanting to be an archaeologist. That was my first.
So you you just basically had that set that's what you're going to do from a young age, and you stuck with it.
I stuck with it.
So did anybody ever? I mean, okay, so I know you're not supposed to ask a lady this, Lorraine, but I feel it's important because you talk about the time frames of the struggles. How old are you?
How old am I now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm 82.
That's awesome.
And I don't mind.
Man, I just can only hope that I have the brain and mobility and abilities that you have.
Well, all of those things are failing.
Okay, so, I asked that because our listeners need to kind of understand, where you're at.
Context.
So whenever
I started college in 1964.
Well, hold on one second.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. But hold on one second. So, it was obvious your parents were encouragers, right?
Yeah.
By giving the books, and he knew obviously. So my only assumption could be that you said from an early age that you wanted to be an archaeologist, right? Was there any pushback from the family? Was there any reluctancy there?
Yes, in a sense, I think they would rather I have chosen a career that was more mainstream. Because particularly at that time, the idea was that archaeologists starved to death. And my family, of course, coming out of the Depression, wanted me to do something that would earn a reasonable living. And so I think that was really the only thing that concerned them. But they, as I went through the process, they were proud of what I did. I married a man who was an archaeologist. He was a prof, and they cared deeply for him, and I think they always respected our career choices. And that makes a difference.
No, 100%. Okay, so let's take a step back. So you are set on being an archaeologist. And so you said here, you told me you went to Lamar University. So tell me about that experience. Was it an eye-opening experience? Which, of course, you're close to home. So it's
yes,
not...
I lived at home.
You went to your whole...
My whole 4 years.
Oh, okay.
Many of us in our neighborhood did. We carpooled to college. Went to college with many of the same kids I'd grown up with.
That's awesome.
There was a fair amount of discord when I was in college. When I started classes, the university, for the first time, it was a college then. It was integrating. We had to walk across picket lines to go to class.
Oh, wow. What did that feel like?
It was unsettling because I grew up in a very liberal Presbyterian household. And it bothered me that if black kids in our community went to college, they had to leave home. And at that time, department heads pretty much had control of their departments. So if they didn't want you, you didn't get your degree in their department. And the geology prof wouldn't let a girl major in geology.
Really?
I didn't want to major in geology, but being hard-headed and having known him all my life because he lived in my neighborhood, I refused to take a geology class. So I'm probably the only archaeologist in the world who never took geology in college. I did take soils, but I never took geology.
Okay.
But, seeing that kind of prejudice, I was very fortunate because I knew where I wanted to go. But Lamar was a fledgling university. It was a very good engineering school. But our chemistry department and our biology department were excellent. And I had a very good foundation. Our classes were taught by PhDs. We had field work. Faculty treated me beautifully, all of us. And it was a really good place to go to college. It was an accident. I wanted to go to UT, but I couldn't afford it.
Okay.
But it turned out to be the best education possible because it was a hands-on college.
Well, if you had to just give, top level description of your time there, what would you say?
That I got an outstanding education and a tremendous academic work ethic.
Awesome. Okay. So let's transition there. So you went to the University of Texas. So I think I'm catching on to why you went, but why did you go?
Well, they had a really good anthropology department. Mm-hmm. I already knew a couple of profs there. Mm-hmm. And so I felt comfortable there. Mm-hmm. One of the professors that I had met as a kid, I'd been a member of the state archaeological program, and we did summer digs. Mm-hmm. And I got to go, and I met
Where were these digs at?
One of them was in a marsh just outside Beaumont.
Oh, really?
And it was a lot of fun. But I met all these the two major professors, and one of them had a project in northern Mexico. Mm. So I went there, and I walked in his office, and I said, I'm here, and I want to go work in the field in Mexico for you. And he said, University of Texas has never let a woman go in the field. But I know you, and you're single, so you don't have a husband, because in those days, if your husband said no, you were out of luck. He said, you're over 21, you can make your decisions, let's do it. He was actually called up before the Board of Regents for making that step.
Wow.
And he held his guns, and I was first girl at the University of Texas.
How did that feel at the time?
It felt strange.
Well, but the reason why I asked, because knowing that he says okay, you had to have known that he was going to go. He had to go face.
Well, no, he did not.
Oh, he didn't let you know?
No, he didn't have a clue. I was in Mexico before he got the call.
Oh, wow.
And he told me when I was talking to him on the phone, he said, "You're not going to believe what happened to me today. I had to meet with the Board of Regents."
Wow.
And he said, basically, I laid it out: 21, single. Mm-hmm.
So you're the first. So you
I was the first from the University of Texas.
Oh, that's awesome. That's amazing.
And there was a woman there, a PhD, who was very famous and wonderful archaeologist, and worked for the university and went in the field at that point. But when she was older than I, when she had been a student, she had to go to Utah to get field work.
Oh, wow.
So it was a hard transition for women in archaeology to have the opportunities to go in the field in most places. There were exceptions, but by and large.
You felt blessed for yourself.
Oh, like I said, my whole career was an accident. I stepped out the door at the perfect time.
Wow.
People go, "Oh, wow, you did this," and I go, "No. It happened to me.
That's awesome.
I didn't do it. That door opened while I was there."
That's fantastic. Okay, so top level on University of Texas. What's your takeaway from your time there?
Well, I spent 7.5 months in the field. Mm-hmm. I went down the first time for summer with a person, Ron Ralph, who's still a close friend. We surveyed miles and miles of the desert in northern Mexico in the state of Coahuila. And it was magic. Mm-hmm. It was absolutely magic. And we were introduced to an elderly man who liked to travel around the deserts and collect arrowheads and sell them to rock dealers. And someone told us he knew where all the sites were. So we hired him, and he hauled us around for 3 months.
That's awesome.
And he was wonderful. He took us places to see archaeological stuff, but he took us to villages, just little hamlets out on the desert, where the people there, the women there, had never seen an Anglo woman.
Really?
It was so weird.
What did that? I mean, did they look at you like you're an alien?
Oh no, not at all. People in Mexico were unbelievably wonderful and kind, and they were wonderful people. I had a kind of odd experience. Ron and I took AFCBO, and he was taking us to a village, and it had been marooned for a couple of weeks because there had been storms. And so we were driving our four-wheel drive truck with huge military tires across the desert, and we were the first truck to get in 2 weeks. So the whole village was standing up on the high ground watching us come in. And we came in and got to the top of this little knoll, and I happened to be driving, and I opened the door to step out. And when I did, all the villagers or the hamlet dwellers were looking at us, and all of a sudden I stood up on the running board of the truck, and there was just this hush. And I didn't quite know what to think. And Eusebio was pushing me to get down, and I noticed the crowd parted, and there was an elderly woman winding her way through these 20 or 30 people. And I didn't know whether to be frightened or not. And I'm standing there, and Eusebio says, get down, get down. So I stepped off the running board, and she came up to me, and she was really old and dressed in black. And she came up, and she put her fingers all over my face and was muttering. Mm-hmm. And then she smiled, and she turned around, and everybody cheered. And I thought, what happened? Without really thinking, because I had some relatives from Mexico. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me. I grew up in the East Texas folk tradition. But Eusebio explained to me later that the women in the village, a lot of them had never seen a white person. We were the first people in 2 weeks. Everybody was excited we were there. And, of course, men and everybody, some of them I'd met before. But that when I stood up, all they saw were my blue eyes. And the folk belief is of Malopo, or evil eye, is that perhaps someone there would look at me inadvertently with how beautiful your eyes are, or something like that, and would inadvertently give me Malopo, which could make me ill. Oh. They didn't want to do that. Oh, and wow. She was a curandera in the village, and she came through and released that fear.
Oh, wow.
And it was just amazing.
That's awesome.
I was just so astounded because I had some relatives that I had known about Malopo. It just didn't
register.
Didn't register. But it was an amazing experience because to this day I remember standing on that dashboard and looking at this crowd of people and wondering what was going on. Why was there this sudden angst?
Awesome.
And it was really neat. But everywhere we went, people treated us very, very well.
And this was while you're at the University of Texas.
I was at UT doing this. That was what I did for my master's. I went back, finished that survey, went back alone, stayed another 4 months, lived in a small village, and excavated some of the sites we had found the previous summer.
That's awesome.
So it was fun. I mean, it was great.
So what made you transition to Washington State University for your PhD? Okay. So
I was going to go to UCLA.
Okay, so you met him at UT?
I met him at UT, and he wanted to go to Washington
Well, hold
State.
on now. We're getting ahead. So was it love at first sight?
Not really. Actually, I was going with someone else, and my family thought I was going to marry the guy, and so did his parents, and it was a little bit uncomfortable. But Vietnam was going on. He was going in the service. I was in the Mexican desert. And I knew Glenn, but not well. Okay. And I happened to be the last person on a 5-year project. And so over the years, a lot of gear had been collected in Mexico. Mm-hmm. And so when I came back, I brought back as much as I could from where I was living. But we needed to get the rest of the stuff away from Monterey, from college there. Mm-hmm. The person I'd worked with was in the field. So my boss sent Glenn and I in 2 different trucks back to Monterey to pick up our gear.
Yeah, I had to work together.
So we worked together for a week. Well, we got down there, and he had worked on a part of the desert I didn't know anything about. Mm. And so he wanted to show me his sites. We spent several days just wandering around Mexico, visiting archaeological sites. Mm-hmm. We came home, went out to dinner, and I don't know.
The rest is history. You decided you'd stick with him?
Yeah, 42 years.
Wow, that's awesome.
So it was good.
So when you guys were leaving at University of Texas, were y'all married or thinking about getting married? Or you knew?
Actually, we came back. He came to Arkansas to get his master's.
Oh,
here.
okay.
And it was a new program, and I was still at UT. So we got married. He started school. I finished the semester. I came up here and went to work for the new Arkansas Archeological Survey.
Let's get into that for a second.
And that's where really my career roots were put down. Because up to that point, archaeology was pretty much academic. Arkansas, the environmental movement was really going into the direction of different areas of expertise and investigation. People didn't really know what to do. Archaeology was kind of a late comer, but the idea that we could conserve or archaeological sites, prehistoric and historic, or gather data when things were being destroyed and use the regulatory process to do it was forming. Hester Davis and Bob McKimsey started the Arkansas Archaeological Survey. It was one of the first in the nation, and it became the blueprint for cultural resources all over the country, particularly for what became contract archaeology.
And that so that blueprint started here?
It started here pretty much. I mean, there were others, but this was the main impetus.
Oh, wow.
And Hester Davis was a phenomenal person. So we had a person who had a beautiful view of what we needed to do and how to do it. And she was a woman, and she opened doors for everybody.
That's awesome.
And she hired me to be the first registrar of the Arkansas Archaeological Survey. And I was a green kid. I'd never had a real job. Coming to work at 8 in the morning and going home at 5:30 was a totally new concept. So it was quite an experience. And so she really guided my career. And I would never have had the career I did without the year and a half that I lived here.
Awesome. So we'll kind of get into that, but I'm assuming we'll follow the timeline a little bit. But I'm assuming that might have had some decision making for your future, because obviously you're here now. So at the time, actually, let's take a step back. Another question popped in my head. We're just going for it, Lorraine. Yeah. Let's go for it. What year would that put you here?
1968.
1968. Okay. So, what was that like in comparison to now?
Well, it's just the world is so different. Environmental work was just beginning, and what they realized as we began to do environmental work in every aspect is that we didn't have the basic data. And these are the days when environmental impact statements came along. They're very important. People laughed about them and blew them off, but the truth was, if you were going to do something like build a pipeline, you had to know what was on the ground. And we didn't really have the detail. And all of these early environmental studies allowed us to put together the databases that we're still using today. And so that was happening in archaeology too. And I was lucky because I never wanted to be a professor. The idea of teaching school did not appeal to me. That was my husband's dream. And so when I got here and I saw hands on the ground, real archaeological opportunities, my course was set. I was greatly relieved. And I wanted to continue in that direction.
Okay.
And up to that point, I had thought about going to different colleges, but Glenn wanted to go to Washington State because of their soils department. And he was interested in geomorphology, and they had a dynamite archaeology program. So we both went up there, and it was a perfect fit.
How long were you there?
We stayed there about 3 years, I guess.
Awesome. So give me some.
So in the early 70s, we came back. We finished basically what we were doing, writing dissertations. he was offered a job at Northeast Louisiana
Well,
University.
hold on. No, we don't want to skip over. We don't want to skip over Washington
Well, so
State.
we had 3 years there, but at
Yeah.
the end, we.
Oh no, I got you. So I mean, I bet you. What was? Give me the top level. Give me some stories on Washington State.
We had the head of the department was again like Hester Davis. He was really instrumental in putting together what is today cultural resources for archaeologists and the whole thing. And he was the kind of guy that knew senators and all of those kinds of people. So he was very much working, as was Hester, with developing the regulatory process. And he sucked me into this. I loved it. And that's where that started. But the opportunities to do field work there were tremendous. And I went to Spain. We worked in Spain. And there was a major site on the Olympic Peninsula.
Was Glenn with you there?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
We went to Spain together.
Okay.
And because we both worked in Mexico, we spoke Spanish. So we were sent to Spain.
Yeah,
and that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And,
Any interesting stories from Spain?
oh, my gosh.
Let's hear them.
It was fantastic. We lived in a village that had been occupied since Roman times.
Oh, wow.
And the cave, we excavated a cave that went back probably 20,000 years in bits and pieces. The latest material in the cave was Bronze Age, and the earliest was almost just, 20,000-year-old stuff. And it doesn't look like the artifacts of today. And it was fantastic. It was a beautiful cave. The village was wonderful.
So let me ask you about this piece of the experience. So this cave has been relatively untouched, right?
Actually, it had been dynamited, part of it.
Oh, wow.
And what
Is that how they discovered it?
No, that people knew it was there. They'd been raiding it for later material. But a Spanish archaeologist had used dynamite back, I don't know, 20s or 30s, and had blown the face off of a huge, deep deposit. And it went just down and down and down. And through time, and most of the material we were dealing with was Mousterian, which is an early time frame in Europe. But the artifacts from that time period are recognizable by the flaking technology for the flint artifacts that people expect to find. And so we were working with a material that came from a tradition that was not in any way familiar with anything we had seen before. We had the opportunity to sit down with collections from the museums in Madrid and look at the collections, looked at collections from France, and got to meet the archaeologist. And I was suspended down the face of this big blown-out cave face on a platform off of ropes, and I stratigraphically removed the material and labeled it as I took it out.
Oh, wow.
And so I would stand there all day long and pull the stuff out and label it and draw in the stratigraphy, and then go down a little bit further.
No, wow.
And I worked on that cave face.
What does that feel like? What does that feel like to grab an item that hasn't been touched for
Well,
years?
it's magical. And being a typical North American, you're always aware that you're working with material that belongs to peoples who were here a long, long time ago. But they're not your direct ancestors, or if they are, it's a very small part of your heritage. But working in Spain for the first time, I was like, these are my people. These are the people that became me. And I found that quite fascinating to be in a place, and because the time depth was so huge, to go from thousands of years ago to the Bronze Age, and then a few scattered Roman materials on the top. It was transformative in terms of looking at time depth and looking at people and development of culture. And it was a lot of fun. And
what kind of perspective has that given you on life to see, all of this history, to touch all of this history, to discover these things? Has it given you a different outlook that others may not have?
Probably, because I think that I'm kind of a humanist in a lot of ways, but realizing that we really have time depth, and the culture and who we are and how we see ourselves matters, because all of this is a continuum, and it really does give you a different view. And then working in different parts of the world make a difference, because not only are you dealing with time depth and humans, and really having a tremendous respect for human beings through time, you also have that feeling that you can, of empathy and compassion that you can develop when you work in other people's cultures. Because I'm always surprised, or was as a young person, by the kindness and compassion that people showed me when I was just such a total outsider. And to realize that people are, by nature, want to be inclusive. You just got to be nice, And sometimes for Westerners, that's hard because we're pretty brash as a culture. And stepping back, trying to learn to step back and just listen and watch. And I think that it has probably given me a different perspective on a lot of issues today. I worked in northern Mexico with people that were very poor, worked hard, very smart, could do things I could never do or learn to do, and yet they worried about their next meal. I saw the braceros in my villages going north and working in Chicago and coming home and being able to buy their children shoes. So those kinds of things, when you're a middle-class kid, change your perspective. Living around people who really have to struggle for their next meal. Going to a village where in the evenings we would be given supper, and we'd probably be given the only 2 eggs in the house.
Wow.
And that really changes.
That's humbling.
It's humbling, and it made me not ever really want to be a hippie. I never could understand these. I mean, there's sort of a minor hippiedom that goes with universities, but that's more of a cultural thing. But the really hardcore hippies that you see hanging around the universities, I found that really disturbing, because most of them were from very well-to-do households. And to play like you're poor is an affront.
Yeah.
Because it is so hard to be that way when you've seen people who are working so hard just to keep their kids in school or just to put food on the table. And then combine those with the stories of our parents who grew up during the days after the big crash in the Depression. It gave me a real respect for having an opportunity to make my own choices.
That's awesome. So, number one, thank you for sharing that. That's amazing. Number two, I have to ask. So, this is a few years ago, around one of the first times we really talked, and you told me about some kind of story, and I may be messing up. So, for those that are listening, just give me some grace here. But you told me a story about. Were you and Glenn in some type of situation where there was an uprising in the village or something?
That was in Peru.
Okay, so let's hear that story. Why were you there, and let's get into the uprising. Okay.
You want to? Okay.
Yeah, let's hear that one.
My husband had a Fulbright in Colombia.
Okay.
And he spent the summer there. And I went down to visit. We wanted to go to Machu Picchu and to Cusco. So I flew down, spent a little time in Colombia with him, and we went to Peru. And Peru at the time was having a lot of problems with political problems. And Glenn and I spoke Spanish, so we never hung around in the places where American tourists were. So we did what we always did. We flew into Lima, went to a very nice Peruvian hotel where there really weren't tourists. There were a few, I'm sure, but it was basically a hotel for South Americans. And so that afternoon, we went out on the street to explore. And we found this little fair that was going on, and we stopped to watch. And there were people with, there were several men there who had groups of young children that I suspect they owned or took care of. And the kids would do tricks for money. One kid would pour lighter fluid on his arm and light it. I mean, he had a jacket and they'd light it, and then they'd put it out. One kid would juggle, that sort of stuff. And it was kind of like the pictures in my mind of what Britain was like back in the early days. And we were really enjoying this. There were people selling food. There were vendors selling products that people could use in the neighborhood. And we were several blocks from the hotel in a barrio. And all of a sudden, people started hollering because someone's pocket had been picked. Well, all of a sudden, it became obvious that there were pickpockets among us. So people started running, and we started running back towards the hotel, and this mob of people were attacking people and ripping their watches off their arms, and stealing purses and things. So Glenn and I started running, and we ran back to the hotel. And at one point, a guy with a pocket knife tried to cut his watch off his wrist. And I swung around, and I happened to have a pop bottle of mineral water in my hand. And when he saw me swing and he saw the bottle, I think he thought I was going to hit him. And he stepped back, and Glenn's watch hit the ground, grabbed the watch, and we ran to the hotel. So we got to the hotel just at dusk. Well, at that point, a riot was starting. I mean, this was all part of this civil unrest.
Wow.
And people started rioting, and they were just marching up and down the street and bashing in the windows and stealing everything. There was a business across the street with television sets. People were carrying them out, furniture. People were yelling and going on, and then they hit the hotel. So we got a phone call from the desk, and they said, lock your door. Don't open your door for any reason and put your furniture up against the door. So this mob just swept into the hotel.
Could you hear him outside?
Oh, my gosh, yes. I mean, we were looking out the window and just watching people screaming and yelling, and they had torches and trying to set fires on the street. And it was a full-fledged riot, and we'd never seen anything like that. So we're watching all of this, and we got a call as they stormed the doors of the hotel. Well, sure enough, pretty soon, you could hear the people coming up the stairs and running up and down the halls in the hotel.
How did that feel?
Scary. And they were banging on our doors, and they had, some of them, I guess, had some passkeys or something, but they were trying to get into our room. So we stacked all of the furniture we could push up against the door, and then stood at the window, watched what was going on the street, and said, what do we do if they break in? But they never did get through. And pretty soon, the authorities came, and there were police cars and all kinds of things. And then we got the call from the desk saying that it was okay. All the marauders had been removed from the hotel. We were safe, but they did recommend we stay in for the night and do not go out on the street.
Yeah.
Well, of course, we weren't going to do that.
Right. Did you sleep at all that night?
No, not really. And we had an early flight out the next morning to go to Cusco already. And so we just sort of sat there all night. And got up the next morning and took a cab to the airport.
Wow.
The end of that story was, though, we had put cash in the hotel safe that night. And when we got it out the next morning, about half of it was gone.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't a lot of money, fortunately.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that was an employee. I've never had a theft before or since like that. But
any other dangerous situations like that you can think of?
Off and on, here and there, but not really.
Okay.
That was probably the most obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
The other ones, usually, we were able to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
In Mexico, people, running up down the desert, the drug trade hadn't really started yet,
Mm-hmm.
and yet there were smugglers, and we were warned what to watch for and where not to go. And when we saw trucks on the desert on our tracks where we were driving, to get out of the way.
Mm.
But I really didn't have much trouble. People watched out for me. I was such an idiot that the local people didn't let me
Endanger
walk
yourself.
into some of the things that I almost did. Now, we did do some crazy things. In Mexico, we examined a lot of vertical shafts and caves.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron was a caver. And so we, without even thinking about it, would park our truck. And if it was Eusebio, we knew we were safe. We'd give him the truck keys, and we'd go down in the caves or whatever, or down in the vertical shafts, rappelling in and out. But a couple of times we had hired guides, somebody to show us a site that we didn't know. And without thinking, we would, leave them up top with the keys to the truck. We'd be 30 miles to the nearest paved road, and we'd go down a vertical shaft. We never thought about it until towards the end one day. And it dawned on us, well, what do we do if the guy steals our truck? And we're down in the bottom of this cave, and we can't get out. Because sometimes we depended on them to help us out.
Sounds like you're a very lucky individual.
Well, it actually happened to some friends of ours in southern
really?
Mexico, and they spent a couple of days in the cave before they were rescued.
Oh, wow.
So they thought they were dead, and Ron and I just shook our heads and were like, oh, how lucky we were, because we could so easily, or, maybe we wouldn't have been stuck in the bottom of a cave. Maybe we would have crawled out and rappelled out because we had the ropes. But we would have gotten out in our truck and our water and our food, and everything would have been gone, and we'd have been miles and miles and miles from the nearest highway.
Yeah.
So it was dangerous, but we were very lucky. Usually people watched us.
Well, speaking of danger, I mean, you've mentioned several times so far about, you being in, tight spots and in interesting situations while you're taking care of business. Did that ever affect you? I mean, were you ever... did you ever feel or like uneasy about it, or are you one of these people that just crawl in a hole and find something?
I kind of crawled in a hole. I don't know why, but when I was young, I was really foolishly fearless.
Mm-hmm.
I really thought I was pretty, safe.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I wasn't. There were places in Mexico that I wanted to go, or that we wanted to go to do some look in a valley or something like that, and the local people would say, no, don't go there. Just don't go there.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't. But it was rare because we really were lucky. We were out there before a lot of the mischief and danger and just violence that's in Mexico now had started. Mm-hmm. It was just little minor pieces of things, and people really kept me away from it.
That's great.
And made sure I was safe. But it wasn't because I was wise. Wisdom was never my strong point. And my mantra is don't do anything stupid. Because I have so often.
That's funny. Okay, so let's transition. So, let's talk about the part of your career and the environmental consulting. So you transitioned from Washington State and got into environmental consulting, and then you transitioned into owning your own business essentially. So let's talk about that a little bit. That journey.
That was an odd one because I had worked with Hester. And I knew kind of where I wanted to go. And then I got to Washington State, and that was the direction of their department, was turning out archaeologists who could function either as professors or doing work on the ground in this sort of new field of contract archaeology. So I moved to Louisiana. Glenn started teaching. I needed a job, so I pumped gas at Sears for a couple of months. and found a job with a consulting company in South Louisiana and went to work for them as an archaeologist. And they had the director of their archaeology group was a really nice guy, and we worked well together, but he moved on. And I was kind of the senior person there and the only one with a PhD, but they didn't want a woman to be in charge of a department in their environmental firm, and they told me that. And they hired a young man who'd just gotten out of grad school with a master's degree that didn't have a lot of experience. And I thought, I don't want to do this. So I quit. And I came up to Northeast, and I looked around, and I got a contract with the Soil Conservation Service, ran it through the university, hired my partner, who was a friend, who had gone back to Britain to finish his graduate work. And then we did that job. When I was leaving my previous job, I had been working on a large north-south expressway project. It was a proposed expressway from Opelousas and to basically here. To join for the north-south freeway system that would go all the way to Kansas City. And I was working on the Louisiana portion, and it was kind of in between places. And the person with whom I was working with North-South was an engineer from a firm in Kansas City. He got in touch with me and said, "We're starting up the next phase. Where are you?" And I told him that I had left. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, they didn't want me to be head of the department, and I didn't see any point in staying on." And he said, "Well, I don't see any point in giving them my business." So I went down, and he said, "Why don't you start your own company?" And I said, "I don't know how." And he's
I about lost a drink.
He pulled out a yellow pad and said, "Here's the way we're going to do this." And he told me how to set it up and how to get the contract. And I called my dad, and I borrowed $11,000 to pay my staff, and we
off to the races. How long did that last?
40 years.
40 years.
I mean, that was the beginning, because from there on out, I never looked back. It was touch and go a lot of times. Dennis and I were the only two people. We'd hire temporary staff, which you do with archaeology for projects. But slowly but surely, we realized we had enough business to use one other person part-time. Well, pretty soon they kind of want to stay full-time, so you have to generate a little extra business to keep that person employed, and then you're generating more business.
I understand.
On your head, and you've got all these employees in a building, and
that's fantastic. So let's talk about that, because you're getting into entrepreneurship. So what was the greatest struggle for you in running that business? I don't know that I feel like there were huge struggles in running the business, because I had really good advice, and I had a lot of help all the way along the way. People that I worked with would sit down and say, "This is how you do this." And I had a family with a history of this kind of work, and one was a banker. And he sat me down and gave me instead of talking about how to run a business, he gave me a really good talk on ethics and what my family expected. And so for me, running the business, other than mistakes that I made because I was not a particularly wise person, that wasn't the issue. The issue was trying to juggle the balls that were in the air. I fell into beginning to work again on the West Coast and in Alaska, and we had a business here. We were doing field work here. Throughout my career, I was working on regulatory affairs with agencies, so we had two big major portions of the company. But fortunately, my partner is an incredibly practical human being. And he laughed. He said that it's July, you're working on September, and I'm trying to finish up March. And that's pretty much the way we worked. I was out there generating the business, designing the projects, working with engineering companies to figure out what we needed to do, and he was making sure the field work
was done, was wrapped up. The reports were actually...
Sounds like you had a good yin-yang thing going on there.
Yeah, it really was. And the other good thing was that by accident, we had to price jobs. People didn't know how much it would cost, and no one wanted to spend money on archaeology either. So it was a real challenge. But so what I did throughout my entire career, working in regulatory affairs or whatever I was doing, every year or so, I'd do a field job, either a nice big one that our company was doing or a really couple of small ones. And I did that so that I knew time and cost and manpower. And I was really specialized because I was interested in designing projects. How much is it going to take? How long is it going to take? What's the manpower needed? What are the agencies we're going to have to deal with? And what are we going to run up against? And if I had not continued to do field work throughout my career, I could never have done that.
So you stayed connected to...
I had to stay connected with where we were. And it was just, like I said, everything that happened to me was an accident. You know, I mean, I had to be willing to respond. But because I had no fear, I was fairly foolish. And so I just did what I had to do.
So for the listeners, you know, the top level, when you're talking about some of these things that the regulatory pieces of it, I mean, can you give us some examples so people know what you were dealing with your company as a whole? Like, I get the, you know, but you talk about the interstate project and things of that nature. But get into
well,
you know, what you would have to.
Fortunately, I fell into some really good clients. People like Fluor and Bechtel, Northwest Energy, Gulf Interstate out of Houston, and these people had big projects that went a long way or were very complicated. Because I worked with the same firms. Every now and then somebody would call me and they would say, hey, we're going to build a pipeline from X to Y. And we're just now talking about it. What do you think? Well, they'd give me time to think. And at that point, it would be environmental. We'd be just, what are we going to do? What kind of agencies are we going to deal with?
Are you looking at like the impact of what that is going to do? So
okay, we're going to go from Idaho and the Canadian border to Southern California. We got to get there. We got to go through all these states. We're going to go through a lot of private land. We're going to go through federal land, state land, possibly Native American hill lands. And it's going to take several years. So we have to deal with who owns the lands, what regulatory processes we're going to apply, what federal agencies, what's a lead federal agency, who are all these state and federal agencies and tribal groups that we're going to have to deal with. What about the time frame? When you look at the environment, what happens? What happens to the breeding cycle of hawks? When can we not be doing certain things in certain areas?
Oh, wow. That's a lot of variables.
So, again, you have all these variables, and somebody's sitting there with a napkin over dinner saying, we're going from here to here. What do you think? It's really fun. And you sit down, and they, you know they're doing that with a lot of different people. They're just thinking about it.
That's awesome.
Well, sometimes the job happens, and sometimes it doesn't. But what it does is it makes you think about the whole process. And then, as it would go along, oftentimes you'd get a small piece of it. When they were looking for route selection for a proposed gas line in Alaska, they had to go to Congress they were the proponents for a single route. They had to go to Congress for that. They hired me and a couple of other people to just find the environmental staff they needed to put together the information to take to Congress.
Wow.
And so that was such a varied job. I got to meet a bird specialist from the tundra and things like that. That I would never have thought about. And then when the project was actually underway, they gave me the opportunity then to manage the cultural resources.
That's awesome.
So I worked with the project from the very beginning to when it failed, sadly. But it was many years. We'd done all the archaeological field work.
Who's the most interesting people you met? Does anybody pop in your mind when you say over the course of your career? Who's some of the most interesting people?
One of the first people I met was a pipeline right-of-way specialist for Gulf Interstate out of Houston, and he had taught business in college.
Okay.
And he hired me for the Alaska job when they had a problem up there. And we flew to Anchorage over the years quite a few times. It was sitting on there, and then we did a lot of other projects over the years. It's sitting on an airplane. He loved to tell you all about this is how business works. But he became a really good friend, and a mentor, and I could always call and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I worked with him on projects right through my entire career. And people like that. Of course, Hester Davis was there all the time. A number of, in my major prof in Washington State, there were a lot of us women archaeologists that had graduated under Dr. Doherty, and he was there for us our entire careers, and for many other people. But we laughed at ourselves. We were a group of 5 or 6 professional archaeological women, and some worked in agencies, and some were like us, private people. But what was good about Dr. Doherty was, one, he was an incredible man, and he really knew what he was doing. He had great contacts, but he knew how to teach people to network. And that's what this group of women and I did. We worked with each other throughout our careers. And because some were agency people and some of us were in the private sector, it gave us an opportunity to always say, I don't know what to do about this, or I'm uncomfortable with this. And we had somebody to call, somebody to sit down and talk with. And I think the networking that came out of people like that was extremely important. And I think without networking, in any case, the profession today wouldn't be what it is. And so it was true. But Dr. Doherty and Hester Davis, I think, were my 2 most influential people. I worked with Mr. Cotton, who was the man who helped me set up the business. And later I was told that his daughter had become a vice president of the same large engineering firm.
That's awesome.
So I worked with an Italian man one time on a big pipeline project whom everybody feared, and for some reason we got along great. And he really, really was a good man for me to work with. And those people were always there, and so I had people to touch base with.
What advice can you give to people, because you brought up mentorship many times in this conversation so far? So what advice could you give to some of the younger guys and gals out there getting your career started?
Well, I think mentors can be important. They were incredibly mentor specifically useful in those days because we didn't have a history. Today we have a long history in the profession. But I would say networking is one of the most important things you can do. Yeah. And you should not just network with people who do the same thing you do. If you're in contract archaeology, get to know people in agencies. Spend time, not just seeing them across a desk when you've got a problem or when you're trying to work with a project. But get to know these people and have them know you so that you know, because I think it's important in environmental work and certainly with archaeology to understand what the goals are. And make sure that these goals are practical and that they're pursued in a very ethical way. And that when you sit down, and I think the key to my success was when you sit down with someone and you're working for private industry and you're sitting across the table from the Department of Energy and you've got a problem and they've shut your project down. If they don't like you, if they don't trust you, you're not going to be able to do the best job for your client. By the same token, if your client says, I got a problem and I want you to fix it, and I want you to make sure those DOE people know what's going on, I'm telling you, hang up the phone or catch the next plane home. Because you, as a cultural resources person who's representing a client, You are only as valuable to yourself and your client as the confidence that the regulatory agencies have in your work. They have to know that you are not there to take shortcuts for your client. You are there to keep or to place your client in compliance. When you've got a big project and it's got complicated things, have some people with the agencies that are friends of yours that you can call and say, hey, we're going to be doing X. And I'm kind of uncertain about this aspect of it. How do you all feel? How do you deal with this? Get as much information from people as you can so that you can make the system work in a reliable, consistent, and ethical way. And if you can't do that, you're not going to do anybody any good.
Okay.
And that's really important. And in the early days, you did have people who, and you still do sometimes have contractors who, oh, well, just bend the rules here a little bit. And that's, if I bent rules, I wouldn't have had a job in a very short period of time. And so you have to maintain your integrity, and you can only do that by networking. You got to see both sides.
That's awesome.
So that was it, and that was a long answer to
No, but that's
way too much answer.
That's what we look for here. So 2 more questions, Lorraine. Number 1, you've been in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite place you've been?
Ooh. I love the Northwest.
Oh, do you?
I'd like to live there. But I think my favorite places are places where there is still wilderness.
Gotcha.
I think that's really important to me. I love the North Slope. I love deserts. I'm particularly fond of mountains. And I'm overwhelmed with big trees. So I like to be where there is natural stuff.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of the heart of who I am.
That's awesome. So last question. What gives Lorraine joy?
What do I enjoy?
What gives you joy?
What gives me joy? The outdoors.
Just the outdoors.
Yeah.
Okay. The outdoors. Seems like that's been a constant theme from day one.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's all been, I am an archaeologist. That is my passion. I'm fascinated with people. I like people. I like human beings. But we live on a landscape. And it's the landscape that I really treasure.
That's awesome. Well, Lorraine, thank you for being on this podcast. I hope you'll come again.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
And until next time, thanks, Lorraine.
Fun. Thank you.